Alright, let's dive into the roller coaster that was the British campaign and raids in the southern states of 1780. Now picture this, it's the height of the American Revolutionary War and the British are just done messing around with polite coastal skirmishes. They want control and their new strategy is simple. If you can't win the hearts, win the land. Preferably with a bit of fiery drama on the side. So by 1780 the British decided that maybe they'd been a bit too soft with the colonies. All those battles up north didn't quite bring that knockout punch they were looking for. Their new plan? Go south, where they thought they had way more loyalist supporters, people who still wanted to sip tea and sing God Save the King without being accused of treason. It was their big break. They thought the South would welcome them like conquering heroes. Spoiler alert, not exactly how it went down. Lord Charles Cornwallis, aka Mr. I Got This, was in charge, aiming to take over the Carolinas and Georgia, and then steamroll his way back north. And guess what? The British had a few allies lined up, a mix of loyalists and some outright mercenaries who were ready to take on their neighbors. That's right, they were stirring the pot big time, and it was about to get real messy. Now, here's where the fun, chaos really begins. Cornwallis and his crew decided to start flexing, staging one raid after another across the South. Think of it as colonial-era door-to-door persuasion, except with cannons burning fields and tax collection that left locals thinking, wait, who exactly are we paying here? The British hit Charleston like a freight train, taking it in May 1780 after a long, relentless siege. General Benjamin Lincoln and the Americans put up a brave fight, but after 6 weeks, Charleston fell, and nearly 5,000 American troops surrendered. And if Charleston was the appetizer, the British decided the whole southern region was the all-you-can-plunder buffet. Their strategy was to essentially liberate the South by, well, making everyone's lives worse. It was one thing to take land, but the British started torching farms, confiscating property, and oh yeah, angering anyone who wasn't a die-hard loyalist. And while Cornwallis figured this was all just good war tactics, the local patriots and even some undecided folks were having second thoughts. People who might have been on the fence about independence took one look at their scorched fields and thought, you know, maybe these rebels are onto something. Now, in the middle of all this, we get to the peak of the British campaign's total insanity. Cornwallis was pushing deeper into the Carolinas, and to keep everyone in line, he deployed his not-so-secret weapon, Banastre Tarleton. This guy was basically the British version of a one-man wrecking crew, famous for his ruthless no-quarter tactics, meaning he didn't just capture enemies, he made sure they were permanently out of the fight. The Battle of Waxhaws in May became infamous because Tarleton's forces gave no mercy to a group of surrendering American soldiers, sparking the rallying cry, "Remember Waxhaws," which made even moderate colonists recoil. It was the 18th century equivalent of bad press that just wouldn't quit, and patriots were fired up. Far from subduing the South, the British had essentially lit a fuse, and the patriots were about to explode. As the raids continued, local militias, led by people like Thomas Sumter, the so-called Gamecock, started fighting back, staging guerrilla-style attacks. These skirmishes weren't formal battles, but rather hit-and-run nightmares that kept Cornwallis awake at night. Sumter's band wasn't huge, but they were quick, slippery, and knew the terrain way better than any redcoat. Think of them as the mosquitoes of the battlefield, small, but they had the British swatting and swinging wildly. By now, Cornwallis was in deep, and things weren't looking as glorious as he'd planned. Every inch of territory he took seemed to come with a side of patriot backlash. The locals, who were supposed to be his loyalist supporters, were turning into the kind of rebels you wouldn't invite over for tea. And honestly, they weren't just rebelling, they were innovating. Using local knowledge, they set up ambushes and laid traps, catching the British off guard time and time again. Meanwhile, news of the brutal Waxhaws incident spread like wildfire. Far from inspiring fear, Tarleton's tactics rallied more colonists to the patriot side. People were hearing about this guy thinking, wait, the British are cool with this? Suddenly, the fight for freedom was looking less like a political slogan and more like the only reasonable choice. Then came the pivotal moment. At the Battle of Kings Mountain in October, a patriot militia absolutely shredded a loyalist force under Major Patrick Ferguson, Cornwallis' second in command. It was the ultimate mic drop for the patriots. King's Mountain was a turning point, showing that the British weren't invincible and that even a supposedly safe region could turn hostile in the blink of an eye. So how did the British Southern Campaign end? Well, spoiler alert, it didn't quite go as planned. Cornwallis eventually realized he was spending more time putting out fires than winning hearts and minds. His forces were stretched thin, Loyalist support was shrinking, and the rebels seemed to be multiplying like rabbits. Instead of strolling to an easy victory, he was bogged down in what looked like a never-ending battle. By 1781, Cornwallis was forced to rethink his entire approach. And where did he end up going? Yorktown, Virginia. Yeah, that's right, the place where it all came to an end. Turns out pushing through the South wasn't so much a brilliant strategy as it was a long, painful death march toward the British Empire's ultimate defeat. Looking back, the British campaign in the southern states was supposed to be the strategy that would finally put down the American rebellion. Instead, it was a disaster that fanned the flames of revolution even hotter. Instead of rallying Loyalist support, they turned moderates into rebels and rebels into legends. The infamous raids, brutal tactics, and heavy-handed approach didn't crush the American spirit, it galvanized it. In the end, the British learned a hard lesson about Southern hospitality. The locals weren't about to roll out the red carpet for an occupying army, and the guerrilla tactics used against them were a preview of the kind of messy warfare that would define future conflicts. Cornwallis and his crew didn't just fail. They walked right into the history books as examples of how not to win a war on foreign soil. So there you have it, Britain's Southern Campaign, a masterclass in how to take a bad plan and make it even worse. And if there's any lesson here, it's that sometimes the locals know best.